Okay, we are here. We are going to harvest this bin, and we're going to assume that it's all the way basically up to this lip here. We still have a little ways to go, but we're just going to demonstrate how we'll do this. And the first thing we're going to do is we're going to scrape off the top 3 to 4 inches, which is where most of the worms should be. You can set that aside in a bucket if you want, but since we have our brand new bin ready to go, we're just going to seed it with worms right from the top layer here. So we'll take a look at what we've got, and there are the worms right there. So we'll dump those in, and we'll get another half load here. And you can see all the stuff that's kind of not breaking down is going to be going into our bin here. We've got more worms. And if you get a real close up here, can you get a close up of that? This is a worm cocoon. It looks like a little yellow lemon drop. And that's a really good sign. Here's another one. And there's another one right there. And here's a big one that's red. So that's actually getting ready to hatch. So this is a very healthy bin. And now we have just started a brand new bin from it. So the next piece we're going to set aside, and I'll just grab a bucket. Okay, so now we're ready to pull off the rest of our worms that we want to save to get our bin started again. And we'll take a look in here, and it looks like we've got some good worms. We'll scoop those in here. You can see a bunch of worms are already heading for the deeper parts. So we'll scoop that in there. And we're gonna scoop away any other type of stuff. You can see lots of worms in here, nice and healthy. So we wanna get as many of the worms as we can for starting our next bin, because we certainly don't want them in our compost that we're trying to age. So let's see, it looks like, we can just keep scooping off more worms, which we're going to save for our bin. Eventually the worms will stop going deep, but it looks like this bin actually has worms kind of all the way through it. So we're going to show you another technique. So in this case, you could just take this material and put it right in a bucket and let the worms basically die, or you can bait the worms at the top of the bucket with some moist bread or a small piece of melon that they really like. They'll come up to eat that, and you can just keep scooping them off. But we're going to try another mounded method, which basically you would just dump your entire bin onto a tarp, or in this case, a piece of cardboard. And you can see there's just worms everywhere in this bin. So it's going to take us a little time if we wanted to harvest out all of these worms. Okay, so we're back with our empty bin, and we're going to basically set this up the same way we did when we built our bin. We're going to put down our thin sheet of paper on the bottom. And then we're going to put in some of our bedding. In this case, it's leaf mold, kind of broken down leaves. We're going to fill it up about 1/3 of the way. And then we take our worms that we've set aside, and we put those in our bin. And any other worms that we want to capture, you can see them nice and happy there. And we're all ready to feed our bin. And we've harvested all this material. Okay, so you can see the material that we harvested still has quite a few worms. You could put this right in your garden, and the worms will be let go and released. You can also put it in a bucket and let this store over time, and the worms themselves will decompose. Or you can do a further, which is more labor intensive, harvesting model where you make it into a mound. The worms ideally go away from the light. They go deeper and you just scrape off layers at a time. You might even need to pull out some worms as you go until you get to the bottom layer, and that can take 8 to 10 hours. I've got a bucket full of vermicompost that I've harvested from a bin, and you can see it's still breaking down a little bit. We've got quite a few of those tiny white specks, which are the springtails, but it's feeling real nice and fluffy and ready certainly to be used in the garden or in our potting soil. One thing you want to make sure with your vermicompost when you store it is I like to put a nice blanket of newspaper. If your castings seem dry, you can moisten that to make sure that they remain moist. You do not want your castings to dry out like dust. You also don't want it to be sopping wet. So our general principles apply: moist like a wrung out sponge. This can stay usable for up to 3 years and longer, and a little goes a long way. So this is going to meet a lot of the fertilizer needs for my garden.